Cinema Bites on CCP TV, the Emmy Award-winning educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Lewis. I'm an associate professor of English who teaches film studies here at the college. Cinema Bites reviews issues and topics within classic and contemporary films. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're having to do things a little differently here, so we're recording from our homes, brought to you by the magic of technology. In today's episode, we're going to interview Rafael Logroño. Rafael is a bilingual journalist, writer, and college instructor based in Philadelphia. He writes and teaches about Latinx communities, race, and media. He teaches a variety of courses across several colleges, including Latin American media, immigration and the American dream, public speaking, and college writing. He's a frequent co-host on the Spanish language radio program Dos Puntos on 106.5 WPPM and Filantinos Radio. His commentaries have appeared in Latino Rebels, Truth Out, and Radio France Internationale. Welcome, Rafael.
Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Oh, great. Well, today's episode is part of a series Rafael and I will do on Latinx film and issues and representations of Latinx people in film. Today's episode will look at how Latinas are represented in film. So, Rafael, what do you think is the Latina representation most audiences are familiar with?
So today we're going to be talking all about Latinas in Hollywood. So we're going to be debunking some ideas of what we mean by Latina. We're going to be seeing different representations of Latinas, and we're also going to be talking a lot about this, stereotypical Latina that we often see. So the common representation of Latinas that we see in Hollywood, to me, it sort of boils down to three representations, right? It's either that hardworking single mother, the one who doesn't have a father in that family dynamic, who is raising a child or several children at the same time, super hardworking. The sexy and fiery Latina, which I think that's your favorite, right, Amy?
That's the one we know.
The sexy and fiery Latina, sometimes she has an accent, right? But she's always super attractive, has, a big breast, a big behind, thin waist, right? That's a Latina that we often tend to see. Example, Sofia Vergara on Modern Family. And then the housemaid, right? The housemaid who's taking care of the family, who's usually from like a lower class, tends to be poor, as I just mentioned, and she's just there, to help out, to fill out like the secondary role. And she's usually Latina, right? She's usually the maid, cleaning up, cooking, serving the food. And all of these ideas that I just mentioned, they're connected to the way that we view gender in Latin America. So this lens of machismo and Marianismo. So this is similar to masculinity and femininity, but it's sort of tailored to more Latin American cultures. So machismo asserts this idea that men have to be tough, right? That men have to be the breadwinners. It promotes the idea that men should have several sexual partners, right? Men have a lot of women. It's assumed that men have women, right? A lot of women who he or they sleep with. And that women are vulnerable and need the protection of a man. On the other end, Marianismo, the one that we don't often hear too much about, which is connected to these ideas of being similar to the Virgin Mary, right? Marianismo, is all about women being self-sacrificing, all about women being pure, needing the protection of a man, and it promotes, again, this purity, this simpleness of just women just being there, not for themselves, but for others. And all of these roles that I just mentioned sort of contribute to all of these things, right? So the sexy and fiery Latina is there because of machismo, right? The housemaid that takes care of everyone except herself, Marianismo. So all of these ideas that we see in Hollywood are represented to these ideas, are represented in connection to these ideas of Marianismo and machismo.
Well, you mentioned the sexy and fiery Latina, and of course I had a reaction to that because, in all honesty, that's the one I see most often. And you mentioned specifically Sofia Vergara, and she is very familiar to us all now, through her work on Modern Family and through the business empire she's built. So we're going to watch a clip with her now. Can you just set the clip up for us? We'll watch it and then we'll talk about it.
So this film is called Chasing Papi. And I say papi because I speak Spanish, right? It's Chasing Papi. It's three women, three Latinas chasing after this man, right? I'm not going to ruin it for the audience, who wins, who gets the man, but it's three very distinct Latinas who fill a certain stereotype, right? A certain depiction of what it means to be Latina, but you will see that all of them have this sort of same physical prototype, right? big behind, big chest, a thin waist, and they all have similar skin color as well. And this shows sort of the variety, but also the simplicity of Latina representation in Hollywood.
Okay, so let's watch that clip.
Solo tu mirada pude recordar ayer y tu suave respirar se apagó al atardecer. Ya no quiero verte si te encuentro por ahí. La mirada bajaré y mi alegría bajaré. Se me olvidó tu nombre, no sé si será reencarnación, tal vez mañana. Se me olvidó decirte que si no quiero olvidarte, tu querer no vale nada. Se me olvidó tu nombre, hasta se me ha olvidado aquel lunar que hay en tu cara. Se me ha llevado el viento.
Every woman in this room is looking at you.
Are there other women in this room?
Don't move, I'll get you a drink. Excuse me? That's taken, and I'm not talking about the seats.
I'll have a mojito and a menu.
Here's your menu. You can have my foot or my fist. Either one comes with a side of claw marks. Would you like to hear the special?
No thanks.
Sisi.
If I ever find out there's another woman, I swear La Llorona will get you.
La Llorona?
Did you hear me? Did you hear me?
Yes, of course. This is for you.
Wicked. Can't wait till the shift is over.
Ay, mamita, you know I have to leave tonight. Unfortunately, my business is in Los Angeles, and it can't wait.
Okay, papi. But if I find out it's more like
I
monkey
know.
business.
A set of claw marks.
So, Raphael, tell us what we just saw and how that factors into what you were just discussing.
So here we see, this representation that you really love, the fiery Latina. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, right? Because, I love to be sexy and fiery. I think we all sort of like that, right? We all sort of enjoy feeling attractive. But this sort of promotes a standard of beauty that's really, really detrimental. This promotes a very specific prototype of what it means to be Latina. And then mainstream society tends to judge other Latinas based on these standards. So I tend to be very critical of this. It tends to be really reductive because a lot of times what we're just focusing on is this person's physical appearance, right? There's no depth to this character. There's nothing else besides what we're seeing, right? This person can be muted. This person can say absolutely nothing at all because we're simply focusing on this depiction of the breast, of the hips, of the sassiness, right? Of this fiery character. And we all know that not all Latinas are that way. I have my moments where I'm sexy and fiery, but I'm not always sexy and fiery, Amy.
So now, Sofia Vergara, and to be clear, we definitely don't want to, vilify her in any way because she is, a powerful representative for the Latina community. But what does she sort of, the character type that she is presenting for you, some people, as you mentioned, might see it as a positive stereotype because who doesn't want to be sexy? Who doesn't want to be fiery? And she has built a huge business empire that is, I'm sure, very empowering to a lot of Latinas. But what is it in terms of Hollywood sort of say to you about the role of Latinas in the film industry?
That's a great question because I sort of see Sofia Vergara as part of this old school representation of Latinas, right? This is not based on her age, not based on who she is, but this old school representation of Latina that we're seeing in contemporary Latinx film, it's these Latinas who had their start in an industry outside of Hollywood, right? Mm-hmm. Sofia Vergara was super well known in the Spanish language media market throughout Latin America. She had her start in telenovelas. like a lot of the famous Latinas that we see in Hollywood, she had her start in telenovelas, which is this genre of television that is absolutely beloved throughout Latin America. And then she did the switch to Hollywood, right? She started learning English. She started becoming part of this, U.S. culture, and she did the switch to Hollywood. And of course, she found so much fame in her work in Hollywood. But on the other end, we're seeing this sort of new wave, this new school of Latino representation that's looking to sort of undo all of that like traditional representation that we've seen. People who are challenging this idea of you having to have a specific skin tone, a specific physical body, a specific way to speak the English language. So I think Sofia Vergara has sort of paved the way for a lot of that, right? She's the person who sort of was the butt of the joke for a lot of time, but she sort of made it work for herself, right? She owns it, and she's proud of who she is, and she's come super, super far. And what I love about her, too, is that she has this really special story of being an immigrant, This is something that we often don't see in Hollywood. So someone who, as an actor, right, as an individual, is an immigrant, comes to the U.S. and succeeds so much. And we can argue that she's one of the top grossing, one of the most popular actresses in Hollywood, right? So we're not trying to vilify Sofia Vergara. Of course, she did her thing, and she's making her money. We give her props.
Great. Well, speaking of Sofia Vergara and continuing with the conversation, let's just show, we have one more clip of her. And this, Chasing Poppy was, I think, 2008. So we have a film that is much more recent, and we're going to show a clip from that and talk about it in a few minutes.
What I'm about to say cannot leave this room. Do you know who Vicente Cortez is?
Yes, he is the top lieutenant in the cartel. He is known as the Bank of Bogota, the Tender, the Lender, the Money Launderer, El Chapo, the Pork Chop, La Chuleta.
Okay. Tomorrow morning, you will escort our witness to Dallas so she can testify against Cortez.
Mrs. Riva, we have got to get going.
Look at you, you're teeny tiny. You're like a little dog that I can put in my purse.
But Cortez has killed every witness we've had.
You're in danger, ma'am. Everything's gonna be fine.
What about my husband?
Everything but your husband's gonna be fine. You don't have to like me, but I'm the best chance you have at surviving.
What the hell is that white stuff?
Thank you, Father.
I should call the police.
No, I am the friggin' police. Don't you see? You're free to go.
But I totaled your car.
I said you're free to go! This accident's gonna be all jacked up. We have been set up, shot at, and hunted down.
Officer Cooper stands at 4 feet 11 inches.
Oh, come on.
The other suspect, a 45-year-old Latina woman, is...
Ay, my madre. We need a couple hours to lay low. Now, can you help us with that?
I kind of like your smile.
You do not know anything about me.
I have seen your underwear.
I like a lot of coverage.
It's no underwear, that's a diaper. I know everything I need to know.
They tried to seduce me with some lesbian stuff.
I am her lover. Ooh la la.
But I'm a Christian, so I wasn't interested in that.
Randy.
Whoa, hey.
Penis. Oh, my God. Penis.
I'm gonna get...
Officer Cooper is 4 feet 9 inches.
I am 5'2".
Traveling with a 50-year-old suspect.
Find them now.
We have to get out of this car right now. They're gonna kill us both. Follow my lead. Mrs. Riva is having some problems with some lady business.
Can't you just hold it?
No, you see, once a month, my uterus sheds its lining so that the eggs descend into the...
Oh, my God.
She speaks Spanish.
Cállate tu boca.
Gringa chiquitica.
Boca muy gorda.
Simplona.
Okay, Rafael. So, we're gonna finish up with our Sofia Vergara conversation, but I did want to use this clip, and I think you did too, to show really how far she's come in Hollywood. You can see the increased budget and production quality of the film that she's working in, so you can see that in a relatively short time, she's come a long way as far as, the Hollywood machine is concerned. So I just wanted to kind of close and leave you some room to comment on that before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. She's grown so much in Hollywood, and she's sort of took the bit in Spanish. We have the saying, she took the industry, took whatever it is, and se lo metió en su bolsillo, right? She put it in her pocket. She became part of the industry and sort of dominated the industry. And this is a perfect example of it. This film came out in 2015. It's a comedy. It's hilarious. I love the film. I love anything that's sort of just that silly sort of banter back and forth between two protagonists. And she's doing her thing. We give her props. She's now a judge on America's Got Talent. And what better way to represent the Latinx experience than being a judge on a show with the name America, with the word America in its title, right? There's nothing like that.
Great. So way to go, Sophia. Thank you for paving the way. Now, as we were preparing for the show, you sent me the next two clips, and very interestingly, as I was watching the clips, I was wondering why you sent them, because for the life of me, I couldn't find a Latina in them. It was only after I watched the clips and learned more about the film and looked at the names of the cast members that I realized there had been Latinas in front of me the entire time. It was just I didn't know how to see this particular type of Latina. So let's start with a clip from Drumline, and we're going to see Zoe Saldana, and then we'll talk about it when we come back. All right, so Raphael, tell us about this particular representation you would like us to pay more attention to.
So I was very intentional in sending you a lot of these clips. And this is one of those where I was like, I'm going to get Amy, and I succeeded. I got you, Amy. So the way that we view race here in the United States, it's sort of in this black and white binary, right? Where white European origin is on one end, and then like the African American experience is on the other. Unfortunately, that leaves Latinos very little room to sort of find their place in these two traditional ways of viewing race that often is perpetuated in Hollywood. And we know Latinos come in all shades under the sun. Latinos can be racially white, black, indigenous, Asian, a combination of any of those things that I just mentioned. And Zoe Saldana, right, it's an Eñe. Zoe Saldana is a black woman, right? She's a black Latina. And she doesn't fit in these traditional stereotypical roles of Latinas, like the lighter skin, sort of the lighter brown skin tone, the fiery role, right? She doesn't fit into that stereotype that Hollywood tends to perpetuate a lot of times. And I love representing for the Afro-Latinas and showing Afro-Latina talent to anyone, because a lot of times it sort of breaks our own sort of biases and our own stereotypes that we have internalized. And I did see your reaction when I said Saldana, right? You did not mess it up. But she did sort of take away the Eñe, the squiggly line on top of the N, to sort of assimilate more to Hollywood, right? Which is a common trend among Latinx actors and actresses and politicians, right? Ted Cruz is a perfect example of that. Ted Cruz, Rafael, right? I'm the only Rafael, but Ted Cruz's name is also Rafael. We see that in Hollywood, right? Where a lot of talent tries to Americanize their name a bit more just to be able to fit into the industry and succeed to however to define success. But it is indeed Zoe Saldana, and she is a Latina. She's an Afro-Latina. She spent a significant time of her childhood in the Dominican Republic, so she's super connected to her roots. Unfortunately, what we tend to see is Afro-Latinas, Black Latinas, sort of being casted into the African-American experience, right? Because our understanding of race in this country is very basic, very binary. It's not as complex as it should be, right? So we see these Black Latinas often having to decide or having to be forced into these roles that doesn't really encompass their experience as a Black Latina, which is vastly different than the African-American experience in the United States.
That's great. And honestly, I had, until we were preparing for the show, I had zero idea she was Latina. You know, in part because of the alteration of how she's spelling her last name, but also exactly what you're referring to, which is the fact that for me, she has always been presented to me as a Black American actress. So it was really interesting to see her through the lens of a Latina. And on that note, we have another clip from another film, I Think I Love My Wife, and it's really kind of along the same vein. So let's watch that clip and then we'll talk about it.
I've been married close to 7 years. My wife is beautiful, intelligent, and a great mother. It's the perfect life. There's just one problem. We're bored out of our minds.
My face hurts. It's not your birthday.
Honey, why don't you get these?
Oh, I like these, and they're comfortable.
Richard?
Hey, Nikki, Brenda.
Hi. Hi.
Nikki's an old friend.
Well, I should go pay for these.
Seeing Nikki got me thinking, what would it be like to be single again? Excuse me, would you like to have sex with me?
Of course I would.
Well, come on.
Nikki is on line 1. Let me take you to lunch.
From writer-director Chris Rock.
Before you get married, you get calls like,
I can't wait to see.
then after you get calls like,
I can't wait for you to come home and see these drapes.
no matter how much you try to look the other way, temptation is always staring you in the face.
Is there a problem, sir?
Is this Hooters?
No, sir.
Is it Hooters? Because if it is, you owe me some buffalo wings.
Tomorrow, have you thought about what you want to do?
Can I ask a question? Why are you still married?
You ever think about getting a skill?
Oh, I got skills.
She's just a friend. Friend? Come on, I've had friends before. They don't look like Nikki.
I'll be there. Yeah, something just came up.
I called him 4 hours ago.
Richard is a responsible guy.
I'm sure you don't have anything to worry about.
You want to help me with this?
Ooh, I don't know what's going on with you, but you fix it.
There's a lot of ways to go wrong, but there's only one way to make it right.
I feel like it's my fault that we're not as close as we used to be. It's not your fault, it's my fault.
I love my wife. I love my wife. I love my wife. I think I love my wife. I'm not even turning around.
All right, so Rafael, tell us what we're seeing there.
So here we're seeing Gina Torres. Gina Torres is a Cuban-American actress who, once again, often gets casted as an African-American woman. And this, I really want to emphasize, this erases the really important African heritage of Latin America. And this is something that a lot of people tend to ignore, either because it's not taught or because of our own sort of biases or racist principles, right? And this happens in the US and this happens in Latin America alike. So this is not unique to the United States. Unfortunately, when these people get casted, they get casted as either or, right? You have to decide if you're going to be Latina and you decide if you have to be Black. Because we're basic consumers, right? And we go based on what we see. Most of the times, these talents get casted as African Americans in the US. And that's bad for 2 reasons. One, we're erasing the Afro-Latinx experience. And 2, that role could have gone to an actual person who's African American and sort of has experience or firsthand knowledge of what it means to be that role that they are playing. So there's this double negative component to it. Hopefully we see more Afro-Latinas and Afro-Latinos getting represented in Hollywood. And we're sort of getting there, right? We're not where we're supposed to be, of course, but we're working our way towards that. And I'm hopeful in the next couple of years, we're going to see a whole bunch of Afro-Latinx talent in our screens.
That's great. And yeah, now to be fair, I am far less familiar with Gina Torres's work than I am with Zoe Saldana's. So I did not even know her name when I was first, watching clips of the film and getting to know it a little bit better. So, but her name was a little more obviously Latina. So when I was looking through the cast, I figured it out a little faster with her. But yeah, it read to me as a Black American female role. So it is really interesting to know that there are perhaps Latinas in front of my eyes all the time that I don't even realize are Latinas, because I have this concept of what it means to be Latina and what I should be seeing if I'm seeing a Latina. So those were two really interesting selections. Thank you for choosing those.
Yeah, no problem.
Now, I remember back in 2018, the Oscars were taken by storm by a little film called Roma, and the film caused quite a stir for a number of reasons. First of all, it was a Netflix production, which raised some questions about what constitutes an Oscar-eligible movie. And then secondly, it was the first Mexican film to win Best Foreign Language Film. So it caused a big stir, in a good way, at the Oscars that year. So you wanted to discuss this film today for those reasons and others. So tell us how this all kind of fits into Latina representation and the film industry.
Yeah, first, I think we have to give kudos to Netflix. I think this new media, these streaming devices, are allowing us to see and hear stories that mainstream media has just ignored for such a long time, right? Hollywood, right? When we talk about film, when we talk about television, a lot of stories often go ignored, but I think new media has sort of brought these stories more to the forefront. We are seeing more intersectional identities, right? We're seeing a lot of trans Latinx and Black Latinx representation with shows like Pose. We're seeing a lot of stories that just often don't get told on television or in film, being told on Netflix, on Hulu. So kudos to them, right? Kudos to them for that representation. When it comes to Roma, I think this brings up a really good conversation about what constitutes Latin American and what constitutes Latinx. So considering that I study a lot of Latinx identity here in the U.S., for me, I think it's super, super important to know Latin America as well. There are some scholars out there who are very clear about the distinction of what it means to be Latinx and what it means to be Latin America, right? But in my opinion, we cannot understand the Latinx experience in the U.S. without knowing the Latin American experience, right? Because they sort of feed from one another, considering the migration patterns that have brought the significant population to the United States, and vice versa as well. We can't understand Latin America without knowing the political, economic, and cultural influence of the United States on this region. So I think it's sort of this cycle instead of these two very distinct groups. And Roma is a great representation of that. It was based in Mexico, right? The cast is predominantly Mexican. However, it was consumed here in the U.S., right? It was awarded one of the most coveted film awards in the world, an Oscar. So it's important to start looking at media more from a transnational lens and start tearing down the borders. As much as President Trump, wants a border, it's important to start tearing down those borders, because the media that we consume here in the U.S. can easily be consumed in a place like Mexico and Brazil, in Japan, in Nigeria, right? The media from these other countries, we can consume it in a matter of seconds as well. So I think we're going to start seeing a whole lot more of that in the next couple of years, where the local starts becoming global and the global starts becoming local.
Yeah, and though this is definitely not a Latinx film, I think the win that Parasite had could really open some doors now. I think over the years we've had some foreign language films that have come so close to getting that sort of Best Picture Oscar, but there seemed to be some hesitancy and some fear about giving that award out to a film that wasn't in English. And I think Parasite may have opened some doors, and we may now see films like Roma in the future be able to win not just Best Foreign Language Film, but Best Picture. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think we need more of that too. I think you sort of hit a good place there, right? We need more of that as a country, right? We need to see more of these experiences outside of the U.S. on screen because we tend to be very into ourselves, right? As people who study intercultural communication and love intercultural communication, we know that, right? People living in the U.S., Americans specifically, tend to be very U.S. centric. Everything we consume, everything we believe, this hierarchy of what is great and what is not, right? The U.S. is always on top, and I think we need to start seeing cultures outside of ourselves, and media is that perfect platform to do that. We don't need to open a textbook, which is great reading, right? We don't need to follow the news in a different country. We can start watching films and start learning about different parts of the world.
Yes, do not fear the subtitle.
Very true.
So, well, let's watch the trailer for Roma, which is just so beautifully shot. And then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the film.
Buenas noches, Claire. Buenas noches, Sol.
All right, so Raphael, tell us what you would like us to really focus on, having now seen the trailer for Roma.
So Roma was a historic film for all the reasons that we just mentioned, but also for having an indigenous woman as the face of the film. Yalitza Aparicio has such a phenomenal story. So when she went to audition for this role, she was not an actress. She was not an actress. She had not much of an interest in Hollywood. She was actually finishing up her studies to become a school teacher. Her sister was going to audition for this role that she landed. Her sister, unfortunately, wasn't able to go to the casting and convinced her sister, why don't you go? So Yalitza goes and auditions, and she lands the role, right? She gets the role, this indigenous woman being featured in this film that became an international hit, an award-winning film. And she's there as the face of this film, right? Even though she was the maid, right? We can put that stereotypical role aside. She's an indigenous woman, and we rarely see that. However, there was a lot of criticism. Heading towards Yalitza. And unfortunately, I see this as, the U.S. embracing her more than Latin American cultures. So a lot of famous actresses in Mexico, which is sort of like the media capital of Latin America alongside Brazil, were really criticizing Yalitza. They were criticizing her because of her lack of talent, right? Lack of talent, even though award-winning film. They were criticizing her subtly for being an indigenous woman as well. People were saying she's not attractive. People were saying she doesn't have the skills, she doesn't have the chops to be representing Mexico in film. But here she is doing her thing, winning awards on the cover of magazines and doing her thing. And last time I sort of looked her up, I saw that she was taking English language classes. She had new representation. And she's going to be in future films. So I'm excited for what doors this has opened up for her. And I love seeing Indigenous women represented. Because once again, here in the US, that black-white binary, right? That binary of you're either a European white or you're African American. And Latinos who are not white or black are sort of, in a weird way, in the middle. And when they're white, they're not enough connected to this European experience. And when they're black, they're not connected to the black experience enough because they have that Latinx label attached to them. So I love seeing Alita represent for Indigenous women, and I want to see more of it, right? I want to see a whole lot more of it. I want to see Hollywood turn into a darn rainbow.
That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned the term Indigenous a lot, and that is a term that is now only very recently being talked about as the country is focusing more on, racial justice and equality. But I suspect that while a lot of Americans understand Black, I think they mostly understand people of color because we hear the BIPOC. Right? It's that I in that BIPOC that I think perhaps is a little unclear for a lot of people still. So if you were to describe or explain what Indigenous means, how would you explain it?
Yeah, so here in the U.S., we understand Indigenous as Native Americans, right? And I think that's much easier for a lot of people to understand. So these are folks who are native to this land, folks who were already living here before the colonizers from Europe arrived, before the enslaved Africans arrived to the Americas. These are people whose history in this land was the OG, was the original, right? So these are people who were here making this wealth out of nothing, right? There was a lot of richness in the Americas. There was a lot of talent, right? A lot of craftsmanship. And these are people who have that connection to the land, right? Long before all of these other groups arrived to the Americas and ruined the Americas, right? But these are communities that are still very prevalent throughout the Americas. And unfortunately, there are also communities that have been historically super, super oppressed. When the colonizers arrived from Europe, they murdered, raped a lot of this population. They tried to replace them with enslaved Africans. And then all of this intermingling and the raping and love and marriage and sex created this whole diversity of what we understand to be individuals from Latin America. But I think it's super important because there are still millions and millions of Indigenous people living throughout the Americas. And it's important for their stories to be represented in film.
Good. I appreciate you clarifying that for us because, like I said, I'm seeing the BIPOC terminology come up a lot, and people, I think, really want to change. They really want things to be better, but I do think at the same time we have a limited understanding of what part of that means. And as you brought up, I think perhaps a number of people understand the Native American connection. We grasp that, but understanding that Indigenous means more than that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and I like your example of BIPOC, right? And I think this year, 2020, has been a time of a lot of racial reckoning. We're forced to confront a lot of the racial injustice that has happened in this country. And even though a lot of the movement most of the movement has focused on African Americans here in the U.S., I think a lot of groups that don't identify as African American can benefit from that as well, right? Because the racial injustice is widespread in this country, unfortunately. And a lot of other minoritized or marginalized groups in the U.S. Do experience racial injustice. So we support the Black Lives Matter movement and always try to remember that racial injustice is very much widespread in this country.
Yeah, that's a really good point to note. And, I'm hoping for all the horribleness we have seen, that something positive now from the sort of momentum we're seeing in the movement really comes of this for the Black community, for people of color, for the Indigenous community, for everybody.
Yeah, we've been here before, but hopefully this pushes things forward.
Now, you have one film coming up. I mean, you have many films, I'm sure, coming up. But there's one film you wanted to discuss today that it was supposed to be released a lot sooner, but unfortunately its date is being pushed back indefinitely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But there's a film that eventually will be in theaters that you feel is not only something to look forward to, but something that sort of brings all of these ideas together. So what is that film?
In the Heights, right? It's going from musical to screen. Lin-Manuel Miranda is bringing the film adaptation of the musical to our screens. And I'm so darn excited for this. Number one, because I'm a sucker for musicals. I think I've made it very clear. I'm a sucker for a lot of the singing and the dancing and the jazz hands, right? But putting my love for musicals aside, we're going to be seeing a whole lot more representation that we often don't see in Hollywood, right? And this Afro-Latina representation is going to be front and center in this film because it's based in the Washington Heights. And if you know the Washington Heights, I spent ample time of my childhood in the Washington Heights, not living there, but just traveling, visiting family. You know that it's a Dominican neighborhood. You know that it's Latino. You walk through the neighborhoods and you don't see one sign in English, right? You see a restaurant with a name that's like a town in the Dominican Republic. You see a hair salon with the name of someone who's famous in the Dominican Republic, right? You see a lot of cultural icons from the Dominican Republic. It's a super, super Latino, specifically Dominican neighborhood. And I'm excited to see that depiction on screen because as we know, the Dominican Republic is predominantly a black country. A lot of times it's often not depicted that way. A lot of times internally, a lot of people don't want to accept that it's a black country. But indeed, it's a black country where a predominant amount of the population traces their roots to Africa. So I'm excited to see In the Heights, to see how this film features Afro-Latinas on screen. There's already criticism based on the clips that have already been put out into the world where they're not seeing enough dark-skinned people represented, where the dark-skinned people are sort of playing a secondary role or they're in the background. So I'm excited to watch it next year, and then we can have a more in-depth conversation about the Latinx representation in the film then. But I'm still excited. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. Well, let's watch the trailer for it, since that's one of the things we do have at the moment for this film. So let's roll the trailer.
What does sueñito mean?
Sueñito. It means little dream.
That's it? No story?
All right, everybody sit down. It's a story of a block that was disappearing. In un barrio called Washington Heights. The streets were made of music. I am Usnavi, and you probably never heard my name. Reports of my fame are greatly exaggerated. Morning, Usnavi. Pan caliente, café con leche.
On these blocks, you can't walk 2 steps without bumping into someone's big plan.
I'm making moves, I'm making deals, but guess what?
What?
You still ain't got no skills.
I've been saving up all my pennies in my piggy bank for this day.
This is going to be an emotional roller coaster. The odds are against you.
But there's a chance, right? A dream isn't some sparkly diamond. There's no shortcuts. Sometimes it's rough.
Yeah, I'm a street light choking on the heat. The world spins around while I'm frozen to my seat. The people that I know.
They're talking about kicking out all the dreamers.
But every day is different, so
it's time to make some noise.
We had to assert our dignity in small ways.
Shh. Just listen.
Little details that tell the world we are not invisible.
Ignore anyone who doubts you.
In the heights, we came to work and to live, and we got a lot in common. DRPR, we are not stopping. Every day, until the day we go from poverty to stock options. Today's all we got, so we cannot stop. This is our block. In the heights.
Great. And so that film is definitely, something to look forward to, and it's interesting because Lin-Manuel Miranda has become such a power player in Hollywood, off the success of Hamilton and his other projects. And just something I also noticed, and I know this isn't quite connected to Latinas, but when Lin-Manuel was first really starting to become a household name, I personally noticed a lot of other white people wanted to stop at just calling him Lin-Manuel. And I think, honestly, it was because a lot of us were uncomfortable saying his whole name in fear of maybe getting it incorrect. And I'm noticing now, though, that I hear people say Lin-Manuel Miranda. They say the whole thing. And I think that is, in and of itself, is a sign of, progress and how far he's come and how much he has become a household name, that people are comfortable actually saying his whole name.
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of these individuals who has been at the forefront of Latinx representation in media, right? He's this person who sort of is challenging the traditional ideals in Hollywood. And we have to respect him for who he is, and we have to acknowledge that many Latin American cultures are not like the US when it comes to names. A lot of times in specific countries, these hyphenated last names are super common, right? When someone only has one last name, people are like, what the heck is this, right? So you get both your mother's last name and your father's last name hyphenated. So for me, it would have been Rafael Logroño Lopez, but the Dominican Republic sort of doesn't really acknowledge that too much. So I'm simply Rafael Logroño.
Amy Lewis just sounds so boring now.
we could, Elena, right?
All right. Well, Raphael, this has been such an interesting conversation, and it's been really great to dig into Latina representation. As we've said a few times, I think we have oftentimes a very limited concept of what Latina means, what we would expect to see, how we identify a Latina. And so it's been really interesting to delve into that a little bit more. First of all, looking at the more stereotypical representation we're used to seeing, but then expanding into the growing understanding of what it means to be Latina and the work that still needs to be done. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about all this.
It's my pleasure.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'm your host, Amy Lewis, and I'm here with my guest, Rafael Logroño.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I'm so happy to be having this conversation on CCP TV.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And you have all been watching Cinema Bites on CCP TV, the Emmy Award-winning educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us, and keep an eye out for the next big film debate. See you next time.